So in part 2 of this discussion, I'm going to show you a map. And before I get into this a little bit more, please go watch part 1 so you get some more context if this is the first version you're seeing. But also understand that I'm not a scientist in radioactivity. I'm not a meteorologist versed in what the weather, the various meteorological effects could have on the spread of radiation. But others do. And this map comes from Ukraine's Hydrometeorological Institute, and they released a time lapse of what potentially an explosion would look like at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in a somewhat of a worst case scenario. Now, they use what's called a back roll, and you can see down here kind of behind the bar here, but I'll give you some context here. The measures of back rolls in cubic meter, so BQ to M3. So at the highest end, you see about 100 to 150 back rolls per cubic meter. At the low end, it's very low. It's like 0.01 back rolls per meter square or cubic meter. So just understand that that's kind of the levels. The max out level is 100 to 150 back rolls per cubic meter. Now, a back roll is a unit of radiation measure, and it shows the amount of radioactivity per cubic meter based on what the explosion shows. Also, forgive me for the blurriness here. It does transition to being more clear. I don't know why it does that. It has nothing to do with my computer or your phone or your internet connection. It's just the way this presentation that I have was shown. What the back roll doesn't translate well to is radiation dosage, whereas the sievert does. Now, there's a lot of calculations where you can translate back rolls to sieverts, especially if you have the back rolls in cubic meters to sieverts of direct radiation dosage. I didn't do that, but it's out there. I'm just going to give you the scale of what we are looking at. So Chernobyl, in the immediate aftermath of the meltdown, released something like 30,000 back rolls per cubic meter. That's huge. The exclusionary zone, as it sits now, registers about 20 to 200 back rolls per cubic meter, depending on how close you get to the melted down reactor. You can actually go on tours to Chernobyl, the Chernobyl exclusionary zone, through the Ukrainian government. Now, according to the 2021 U.S. Forest Service study on wildfire smoke and the dispersion of cesium-137, wildfire smoke, which is something we all experience. I know a lot of you in the Northeast experienced it recently coming out of that was blowing from Canada. I'm from Idaho. We see it every summer. That can register 47 back rolls per cubic meter. That's pretty significant. So it's not a small amount in these wildfires. And it's cesium-137, which is actually a bit more radioactive than uranium-235, which is what we see in nuclear power plants. Now, this isn't to say this situation is not dangerous. I'm just bringing some context here, and we'll kind of walk through what this looks like. So Zaporizhzhia sits down here, right here, and I'll try to zoom in on this in the main video, but you can see kind of how it disperses immediately. And you see the red near Zaporizhzhia, and it spreads out to these yellows and oranges. The yellows and oranges, if you can see the scale, sits at 0.25 to 1 back roll per cubic meter. Much, much less than what even the exclusionary zone currently of the Chernobyl meltdown site is experiencing right now. Continuing on, you can see how it spreads, and you can see it clears up there into Europe. And there's a large cloud that covers multiple countries here. So regardless of the danger, if the nuclear cloud does hit these countries, and there's multiple countries, including NATO countries. I mean, what we're seeing is Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, all experiencing some level of radiation exposure. I don't know how that translates to sieverts. I don't know how that looks when you're looking at what is essentially 0.01 to 0.5 back rolls per cubic meter in these regions. But nonetheless, it still is radiation that they're experiencing, something that was caused by likely Russia. Now, could this trigger Article 4 or even Article 5? I'm not necessarily sure. On June 23rd, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham and Democrat Senator Richard Blumenthal registered a draft bipartisan resolution in the Senate declaring Russia's use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine or bombing of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as an attack on NATO, requiring the application of Article 5 of the alliance. Now, with that being said, there are some misunderstandings that come with Article 5. Article 5 doesn't mean immediate kinetic war with Russia. It never has. Article 5 states that if a NATO member country is subject to an armed attack in Europe or North America, it will be considered an attack against all NATO members. In response, each member will take necessary actions, including the use of armed force, to restore and maintain the security of the North Atlantic area. It is a collective defense commitment. Now, the key question here is, how do we define restoring security after this situation? Does it mean to restore security, we see that assisting Ukraine in containing the potential meltdown? Does restoring security look like ejecting Russia from the region? Does restoring security look like attacking Russia? Does restoring security look like finding ways to contain everything? All of the above. I don't know. It's not an immediate Article 5, you attack us, we attack you. It is a defensive treaty, meaning that if Russia does something that causes the defense of NATO members to be subject to an attack, all NATO members must come to the aid of that NATO member. It doesn't mean all members must go and attack the cause of the degradation of defense. So again, I'm not sure how we're going to see this play out. I know no one wants a direct conflict with Russia. We just want this war in Ukraine over. This is a significant escalation. Now, what potentially I could see is basically everything that the United States has been hesitant to give, such as ATACMS, such as F-16s, such as higher-end attack drones, instead of just loitering munitions. We're talking about the bigger predator type drones, etc. Those likely could come into play if that's the case. How this resolution that was put forth in the Senate, how that plays out, I'm not sure. Again, Article 5 and the NATO treaty, the NATO alliance is a defensive alliance. It's meant to eject attackers from the country and respond to an attack. Technically, Ukraine's not a NATO member, but this radiation cloud floating over could be seen as a potential attack on these countries. Now, it wasn't a meaningful attack, but you have to think that Russia likely knew that this radiation cloud can move across these countries, these NATO countries. With that being said, again, this posturing seems to be something where we may actually see something happen. We're seeing comments come out of both Ukraine and Russia saying the other is going to do something, meaning they believe that something is going to happen, both of the main players here. And that's very concerning. How the rest of Europe, the United States, China, etc., everyone in the rest of the world responds to something like this, I'm not sure. So we'll just keep an eye on what's going on. Potentially the next 24 to 48 hours is going to be pretty significant. But as you can see, there is going to be potentially a radioactive cloud that, if this happens, could float over Europe. But again, I want to make it clear, as I did earlier in this video and in the previous video, this isn't a Chernobyl level event according to the experts. Yes, it's concerning, but it's not going to cause massive amounts of death and destruction across Europe with these clouds. And I know the article that this was attached to that came out of, I believe it was the New York Post or something like that, made it sound like it was it's a huge radioactive cloud that suddenly everyone's just going to be burning from radiation. That's not going to be that. This isn't a huge amount of radiation up close to the reactor. Absolutely it is. But way out here in the European countries up here, we likely, at the most, you'd see a wildfire level of radiation, which we've all experienced. So we'll just keep an eye on it, and I'll keep you guys updated as things take place.